The kitchen smelled the way it always did on Sunday mornings, of instant coffee, burnt toast edges, and the faint ghost of pine sol from the mopping Lorraine had done the night before so no one else would have to. The fluorescent light above the stove hummed at a pitch only she seemed to hear, a sound she had reported to her son, Derek, 3 times in the past year. Each time he'd said he'd get to it. Each time he hadn't. Lorraine Delacroix stood at the counter in her housecoat, the pale blue one with the fraying collar she'd owned since before her husband, Clyde, passed. She was 72 years old, 5'3", with hands that had spent 4 decades arranging other people's flowers for weddings she was never invited to stay for, and skin the color of dark honey that still caught the light in a way that made strangers look twice at the grocery store. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had been told to make herself smaller for so long that standing straight had become its own quiet rebellion. She poured the coffee into the same chipped mug she'd used for 11 years, the one that read "World's Best Grandma" in faded gold letters, and listened to the house breathe around her. It was Derek and Vanessa's house now. At least that's what everyone said. That's what Vanessa said every time she rearranged the living room furniture without asking, every time she changed the Wi-Fi password and forgot to tell Lorraine, every time she introduced Lorraine to a visitor as Derek's mother. She stays in the back room. Stays. Not lives. Stays. As if Lorraine were a guest who had overstayed a weekend invitation by 6 years. The back room. That was what they called the converted sun porch off the kitchen. A narrow wood-paneled space with a single window that faced the neighbor's fence and a bed Vanessa had ordered from a discount furniture app. The mattress was thin enough that Lorraine could feel the metal frame through it on cold nights. She'd mentioned this once at dinner, and Vanessa had smiled the way she smiled when she was about to say something that sounded kind but landed like a slap. "We could always look into those assisted living places, Mom. They have real beds there. Memory foam even." Derek had said nothing. He'd cut his steak and chewed. That was 3 years ago. Lorraine had not mentioned the mattress again. The grandchildren, Jalen 12 and Amara 8, were upstairs. Lorraine could hear the muffled thump of Jalen's basketball against his bedroom wall, and the tinny sound of Amara's tablet playing something bright and repetitive. They were good children. They came to her sun porch sometimes, usually when Vanessa was on the phone and Derek was at work, and sat on the edge of her bed while she told them stories about their grandfather, about the man who could fix anything with his hands and who once drove 14 hours through the night to bring Lorraine a pecan pie from her mother's kitchen in Thibodaux because she'd mentioned, just once, that she missed it. Jalen would listen with the half-attention of a 12-year-old, but his eyes would soften when Lorraine described the way Clyde used to whistle while he worked on the houses, a low, tuneless sound that meant he was happy. Amara would crawl into her lap and ask, "Was Grandpa Clyde magic?" And Lorraine would say, "No, baby. He was patient. That's stronger than magic." But the children came less often now. Vanessa had started scheduling them into oblivion. Dance class for Amara, basketball camp for Jalen, tutoring sessions that filled every afternoon and most Saturdays. The schedule was presented as enrichment. Lorraine recognized it for what it was. A wall between the grandchildren and the grandmother whose stories might make them see her as something other than the quiet woman who stayed in the back room. Because that was the narrative Vanessa had built, one careful sentence at a time, over 6 years. At Jalen's school open house last spring, Lorraine had overheard Vanessa speaking to his teacher in the hallway. "His grandmother lives with us," Vanessa had said, dropping her voice to the compassionate register reserved for difficult truths. "She's getting older, and we're managing her care. It's been a lot, honestly, but family is family. Managing her care." Lorraine washed her own clothes. She cooked her own meals and often theirs. She cleaned the kitchen every night because Vanessa left the dishes in the sink and Derek had never, in 44 years of life, learned where the sponge was kept. She walked 2 miles every morning along the levee, her stride steady, her breathing even, her mind as sharp as it had been at 35. The only thing being managed was the story, and Vanessa was the only author. At Derek's office Christmas party last December, Lorraine had been introduced to his colleagues as "my mother. She's in her twilight years, bless her heart." Twilight years. As if she were a lamp being slowly dimmed, a presence that existed only in relation to its own fading. She had smiled. She had shaken hands. She had eaten a plate of catered shrimp in a corner while Vanessa worked the room in a dress that cost more than Lorraine's monthly Social Security check, and she had watched her son laugh at jokes she couldn't hear, his arm around his wife, his mother 12 feet and a lifetime away. No one at that party had asked Lorraine what she did before she retired. No one asked about the flower shop she'd owned for 22 years, the one on Magazine Street that had arranged flowers for 3 governors' inaugurations and a Super Bowl halftime stage. No one knew about Delacroix Florals because Derek never mentioned it, and because Lorraine had sold the business, for a sum that would have made Vanessa dizzy, 3 years before Clyde died. The proceeds sat in the trust. Everything sat in the trust. And the trust was invisible because Lorraine had decided it would be. But here is the thing that no one in that house knew. Not Derek, not Vanessa, not the 2 grandchildren who called her Gigi but could not name the street she grew up on. And it is the thing that makes this story what it is. Lorraine Delacroix was not poor. She was not dependent. She was not the woman they believed her to be. And the life she had built before any of them were born was still very much alive, tucked inside a safety deposit box at Pelican Savings and Trust on Chartres Street in New Orleans, managed by a man named Edouard Thibodeau, who had been Clyde Delacroix's attorney for 31 years and who had called Lorraine every January 2nd since Clyde's death to review the trust, the properties, and the portfolio. Every January 2nd, Lorraine would excuse herself to go to the CVS for her blood pressure prescription. She would sit in her car in the parking lot, call Edouard on a phone Derek didn't know existed. A simple prepaid flip phone she kept in a zippered pocket inside her Bible case, and listen as the old lawyer read the numbers. The numbers were not small. Clyde Delacroix had not been a wealthy man in the way that announces itself. He had been a quiet man, a pipe fitter by trade, a landlord by patience. Over 30 years, he and Lorraine had purchased, repaired, and rented 11 residential properties across the 7th Ward in Gentilly. The properties were held in a family trust, the Delacroix Legacy Trust, managed by Edouard's firm, generating rental income that was deposited into an account Lorraine had never once mentioned to her son. The trust was worth, as of the most recent January call, $4.7 million. Lorraine Delacroix slept on a discount mattress in a converted sun porch and drank instant coffee from a chipped mug, because she had decided 6 years ago to see who her family truly was before she decided what to do with what she had. She had seen enough. But she had not yet decided. Not until this morning. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Margaret Reed. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. The front door opened at 9:47 a.m. Lorraine heard it from the kitchen, the particular sound of Vanessa's heels on the tile foyer, the jangle of car keys tossed onto the console table, the bright, practiced voice that preceded her into every room like an advance team. "Morning, Mom." Lorraine did not correct the name. She had never asked Vanessa to call her Mom. Vanessa had simply started doing it the year she and Derek married, deploying the word with the efficiency of someone claiming territory. To Vanessa, Mom was not a term of affection. It was a title she assigned to indicate hierarchy, and her place above it. "Morning, Vanessa. Coffee's on the counter." "Oh, I already had my matcha. Derek's bringing the kids in. We're heading to brunch at 11. But I wanted to catch you first." Lorraine set down her mug. The word catch sat between them like a fishing hook. In 6 years, Vanessa had never once arrived early to catch her for anything pleasant. The early arrivals were for announcements. "The bathroom is being renovated. You'll need to use the hall bath for 6 weeks. We're hosting Thanksgiving this year. Could you handle the greens and stay in the kitchen so there's room at the table? I signed you up for the senior center shuttle so you're not sitting around the house all day." Each announcement delivered with the same warm, immovable smile. Each one a wall moved 6 inches closer. Lorraine sat down at the kitchen table. She folded her hands. "What is it, Vanessa?" Vanessa pulled a chair out, not the one across from Lorraine, but the one beside her, angled slightly forward, the way a car salesman sits when the paperwork is ready. She was wearing cream linen, gold hoops, and the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed a conversation in the shower. "So," Vanessa began, lowering her voice to the register she used when she wanted to sound thoughtful, "Derek and I have been talking about the future, about making sure everything is settled." Lorraine's hands did not move. Her face did not change. But somewhere behind her eyes a door opened, the door that had been waiting to open for 6 years, And behind it was a room she had been furnishing piece by piece, with every slight, every exclusion, every locked Wi-Fi password and moved piece of furniture, and dinner she ate alone in the sun porch while the family laughed in the dining room 10 feet away. Settled, Lorraine repeated. Vanessa reached into her oversized tote bag, the one Derek had bought her for their anniversary. The bag that cost more than Lorraine's monthly contribution to the household grocery budget, and pulled out a manila folder. She placed it on the table between them, aligning its edges with the grain of the wood, as if presentation mattered. What's this? Lorraine asked, though she already knew. Not the specifics. The shape. The weight of it. The particular gravity of a folder placed on a kitchen table by a woman who has been circling something for years. It's just some paperwork, Vanessa said. Derek's financial advisor put it together. It's a power of attorney. A limited one. So Derek can manage your affairs if anything ever happens. You know, health stuff, legal stuff. Just a safety net. She said safety net the way she said mom. With ownership. Derek appeared in the doorway then, holding a glass of orange juice he hadn't poured for his mother. He was 44, broad-shouldered, wearing the golf shirt and the particular expression of a man who has been told what to say but would prefer to be somewhere else. Hey mama. Morning baby. Vanessa told you about the? She's telling me now. He nodded, took a sip and leaned against the doorframe. He did not sit down. He did not move closer. He stayed exactly where he was, in the space between participation and deniability, the place he had lived for the entirety of his marriage. Vanessa flipped open the folder. Inside were 6 pages of dense legal text. Lorraine could see the words durable power of attorney at the top, her full legal name, Lorraine Marie Delacroix, printed in a typeface that looked official enough to feel permanent. All you need to do, Vanessa said, sliding a pen from the folder's pocket, is sign on page 4 and page 6. I've already flagged them. She pointed to 2 neon yellow sticky tabs. It's really straightforward. Derek's advisor, Marcus, said it's standard for someone your age. Someone your age. Lorraine looked at the pen. It was a heavy silver ballpoint, the kind that came in a velvet box, the kind that was chosen to make a signature feel ceremonial rather than coerced. What does the rest of it say? Lorraine asked. Vanessa's smile tightened by a fraction of a degree. It's just the standard language. Boilerplate. Marcus said you don't really need to read the whole thing. It's mostly legal filler. The important part is that it gives Derek the ability to handle things on your behalf, if you're ever incapacitated. If I'm ever incapacitated. Right. Just in case. Lorraine picked up the folder. She did not reach for the pen. She held the folder the way she used to hold a hymnal, with both hands close to her body, as if the words inside were sacred enough to require careful handling. I'd like to read it first. Something shifted in Vanessa's face. Not alarm, she was too controlled for alarm, but the flicker of a plan encountering unexpected resistance, the momentary recalculation of a woman who had expected compliance and received a pause. Of course, Vanessa said, recovering. Take your time. But Marcus said the sooner we file it, the better. There's a window with the county, and he'd hate for us to miss it. There was no window. There was no deadline. Lorraine knew this because she had been married to a man who owned 11 properties, and had signed more legal documents than most people will see in a lifetime. She knew what urgency sounded like when it was real, and she knew what it sounded like when it was manufactured. This was manufactured. When does he need it by? Lorraine asked, her voice as smooth as river glass. Ideally this week, Vanessa said. Then she added, as if the thought had just occurred to her. We could have it notarized at the UPS store on Wednesday. Marcus knows the notary there. She's very efficient. Efficient. A word that, in this context, meant fast. Fast enough that Lorraine wouldn't have time to show the document to anyone else. Derek shifted in the doorway. Mama, it's really nothing complicated. Vanessa and I just want to make sure you're covered. Covered. Lorraine looked at her son. She looked at him the way she had looked at him when he was 9 years old and told her he hadn't eaten the last piece of sweet potato pie, the same pie whose crumbs were still on his shirt. She had known then and she knew now. The difference was that at 9 the stakes were pie. At 44 the stakes were her life. I'll read it tonight, Lorraine said. She closed the folder and placed it in her lap. Let me sit with it. Vanessa's jaw tightened. A movement so small that Derek, who was already looking at his phone, did not see it. But Lorraine saw it. Lorraine saw everything. That was what happened when you spent 6 years being treated like furniture. You learn to watch the way furniture watches, constantly, silently, from the position no one thinks to guard. Of course, Mom, Vanessa said. She stood, smoothed her linen pants, and touched Lorraine's shoulder. The touch was brief, firm, proprietary, the touch of someone adjusting a pillow, not comforting a person. We'll talk Wednesday. They left for brunch. They did not invite Lorraine. She heard the car doors close, the engine start, Amara's muffled voice asking something she couldn't make out, and then the sound of gravel under tires as they reversed out of the driveway. Lorraine stood at the kitchen window and watched them go. She stood there until the car turned the corner and disappeared behind the Robichaux family's magnolia tree, the one whose branches hung so low they scraped the rooftop of every passing SUV. She thought about last Thanksgiving. She had cooked for 11 hours, the turkey, the dressing, the sweet potatoes with the marshmallow crust that Jalen loved, the collard greens with smoked ham hocks, the pecan pie from scratch because the store-bought ones never had enough bourbon. When the table was set and the guests arrived, Vanessa's parents, Vanessa's sister, 2 couples from Derek's office, Lorraine had carried the last dish out from the kitchen and found every seat taken. Every seat. At her own table. In her own house. Vanessa had looked up, fork already in hand, and said, "Oh, Mom, we set you up a little spot on the breakfast bar. It's cozier over there." The breakfast bar was a narrow counter in the kitchen with 2 stools and a view of the microwave. Lorraine had eaten Thanksgiving dinner 6 feet from the oven she had cooked it in, listening to the laughter in the dining room through the pass-through window, while Vanessa's mother complimented the dressing without asking who had made it. She thought about the morning 2 months ago when Amara had drawn a family tree for a school project. The tree had 4 branches. Dad, Mom, Jalen, and Amara. When Lorraine had gently asked where she was on the tree, Amara had looked confused. "Mommy said the tree is just for people who live here for real," she'd said. "She said you're visiting." Visiting. For 6 years. In a house she owned. Lorraine had smiled and helped Amara color the leaves. The house went quiet. The fluorescent light buzzed. The coffee cooled in its chipped mug. Lorraine sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She did not open the folder. She did not need to. She had felt the weight of it. Not the paper weight but the intention weight, and she understood exactly what it was. She understood it the way Clyde would have understood it, with the patient, methodical clarity of someone who had spent decades reading contracts, spotting the clause buried on page 5 that gave away what pages 1 through 4 had tried to hide. Eventually Lorraine stood. She walked to the sun porch, her room, the room they had given her the way one gives a dog a corner of the garage, and closed the door. She sat on the thin mattress. She reached beneath the bed and pulled out her Bible case. Inside the zippered pocket, beneath a laminated prayer card of St. Therese, was the flip phone. She opened it. She scrolled to the only saved contact. Edouard. She did not call yet. Not yet. There was a sequence to this. A rhythm she had been rehearsing in her mind for longer than she would admit. You do not make the call until you are certain. You do not move until you have seen the full shape of what you are moving against. She had learned this from Clyde, who never bid on a property until he had walked every room, checked every foundation crack, calculated every cost down to the price of a replacement doorknob. See the whole house before you make an offer. Lorraine looked at the folder in her lap. Now she opened it. She read slowly, the way Clyde had taught her to read legal documents, not for what they said but for what they allowed. She moved her finger beneath each line, pausing at the language that mattered, the clauses that Vanessa had called boilerplate and filler. Page 1. Standard identification. Her name, Derek's name, the relationship. Page 2. The grant of authority. The principal hereby grants to the agent full power and authority to act on the principal's behalf in all matters relating to financial accounts, real property, insurance policies, and legal proceedings. All matters. Full power. On her behalf. Page 3. The conditions. This power of attorney shall become effective immediately upon execution, and shall remain in full force unless revoked in writing by the principal, provided the principal is determined to have the legal capacity to execute such revocation. Lorraine read that sentence 3 times. She read it the way a woman reads a diagnosis, with the slow, terrible understanding that the words are not describing a possibility but a plan. provided the principal is determined to have the legal capacity to execute such revocation. Which meant, once she signed, she could only undo it if someone, a doctor, a judge, a panel, agreed she was mentally competent enough to do so. And if Derek and Vanessa were the ones controlling the narrative about her competence, the ones who had already, casually, in front of neighbors and church friends, mentioned that Mama's been a little forgetful lately and were worried about her being alone and she's not quite herself since Daddy passed, then the revocation clause was not a safety mechanism. It was a locked door. Page 4. The first signature line. Flagged with a neon yellow tab. Waiting. Page 5. A clause about real property. The agent shall have the authority to sell, lease, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of any real property owned by or title to the principal. Lorraine stopped breathing for a moment. She did not own real property under her own name. The trust held the properties. Derek did not know about the trust. But this clause was not about the trust properties. This clause was about the house. This house. The house they were all living in. The house that was titled still in the name of Lorraine Marie Delacroix. Because this was not Derek and Vanessa's house. It had never been Derek and Vanessa's house. Clyde Delacroix had purchased this property in 1987, a 3-bedroom brick ranch on a quiet street in Metairie. He had paid it off in 2003. When he died, the house, separate from the trust, held in both their names, had passed to Lorraine through right of survivorship. She had never transferred it. She had never added Derek's name. She had simply moved into the sun porch, let them take the master bedroom and watched. For 6 years, Derek and Vanessa had lived in Lorraine's house, rearranged Lorraine's furniture, changed the locks on Lorraine's doors, and treated Lorraine like a tenant in the home she owned outright. And they had never once checked the deed. Because they assumed the way people assume the sun will rise. Not because they've confirmed it, but because it has never occurred to them that it might not. Page 6. The second signature line. Another yellow tab. Lorraine closed the folder. She sat in the silence of the sun porch, in the room they had given her because it was the smallest and the least comfortable and the farthest from the life of the house. She sat on the mattress she could feel the frame through. She looked at the single window that faced the neighbor's fence. And then Lorraine Delacroix did something she had not done in 6 years. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a sad smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just read the final page of a story she already knew the ending to, and who had decided at last to write her own. She picked up the flip phone. She dialed the number. It rang twice. Lorraine. Edouard's voice was the same as it always was, deep, unhurried, tinged with the particular Creole formality of a man who had been practicing law in New Orleans since before desegregation, and who treated every client conversation as if it were being recorded for posterity. Edouard, I need you to do something for me. Name it. I need you to come to Metairie this week. And I need you to bring the trust documents, the property deed for this house, and your sharpest associate. A pause. Not surprise. Edouard Thibodeau was not a man who was easily surprised, but the pause of someone recalibrating. He had been waiting for this call. He had been waiting for it for 6 years, since the day Lorraine had told him she was moving in with her son and his wife, and he had looked at her across his mahogany desk and said in his careful way, "Lorraine, are you sure they know what kind of woman you are?" She had smiled then too. No, she had said. And I'd like to find out if it matters. Now she had her answer. Lorraine, Edouard said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who understood that this phone call was not a beginning but an ending. The end of patience, the end of observation, the end of the quiet season. What have they done? They've asked me to sign a power of attorney, she said. Durable. Immediate. Full authority over my finances and my property. Your property, he repeated. Not a question. A confirmation. They don't know it's my property, Edouard. They've never checked. They think this house belongs to Derek because they've lived in it long enough to believe it. And now they want me to sign a document that would let them sell it without my permission. Another pause. Longer this time. Do they know about the trust? No. Do they know about the rental properties? No. Do they know about the portfolio? Edouard, they don't even know I have a phone. A sound on the other end of the line. Not quite a laugh, but the exhale of a man whose respect for his client had just deepened by several degrees. I'll be there Wednesday, he said. Come at 6, Lorraine said. They'll be home by then. Vanessa wants to take me to get the documents notarized that afternoon. I'll tell her I'm ready to sign. You want them present. I want them comfortable, Lorraine said. I want them sitting in my living room in my house with my pen in their hands when they find out who actually holds the paper. Lorraine Marie Delacroix, Edouard said, and now there was warmth in his voice, the warmth of a man who had known this woman for 3 decades and who understood, finally, what the last 6 years had been. Clyde would be proud. Clyde would have done it faster, Lorraine said. But Clyde didn't have to watch his own son forget where he came from. She closed the phone. She placed it back in the Bible case beneath St. Therese. Then she picked up the folder, carried it to the kitchen, and set it on the counter beside the cold coffee. She opened the cabinet above the stove, the one Vanessa had claimed for her imported tea collection, and retrieved the one item that was still hers, a small jar of community coffee, dark roast, the brand Clyde had drunk every morning of their marriage. She made a fresh pot. Real coffee. The kind that fills a house with the smell of someone who is not leaving. Lorraine Delacroix sat at her kitchen table in her house and drank her coffee. The fluorescent light buzzed above her. She did not mind it anymore. By Wednesday, it would be the least of anyone's problems. Monday arrived with rain. The heavy, slow Louisiana kind that turns the air into something you wear rather than breathe. Lorraine moved through the day the way she always did. She walked her 2 miles along the levee under an umbrella Clyde had bought her at a hardware store in 1998. She returned, wiped her shoes at the door, and made lunch for Amara, who had been sent home from school early with a headache that disappeared the moment she was offered a popsicle. Derek came home at 6. He kissed Lorraine on the forehead, a gesture so automatic it had no warmth left in it, and asked if she'd had a chance to look at the paperwork. I'm still reading it, Lorraine said. It's not that complicated, Mama. Then it won't hurt to take my time. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Vanessa appeared in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear, and gave him a look. The look that wives give husbands when the script has been agreed upon and improvisation is not welcome. Derek closed his mouth, nodded, and went to change clothes. Lorraine washed the dishes. She dried them. She placed them in the cabinets that Vanessa had reorganized 3 times without asking. The cabinets were her own wedding china. The set her mother had given her, the set she had used for every Christmas dinner for 30 years, had been moved to the top shelf, too high for her to reach without a step stool, replaced by Vanessa's modern stoneware in a color called desert sage. She did not reach for the wedding china. She did not need to. By Wednesday, those plates would be coming down from that shelf on their own terms. Tuesday was quiet. Vanessa left early for a hair appointment and returned with highlights that cost more than Lorraine's last 3 prescriptions combined. She breezed through the house, checking her phone, adjusting throw pillows, and stopped in the kitchen long enough to ask, "So are we still on for Wednesday? Marcus can have the notary there by 4. I'll be ready," Lorraine said. Perfect. Vanessa smiled her performing smile, the one that showed teeth but not eyes. It's going to feel so good to have this settled. Settled. That word again. The word that meant finished. The word that meant yours is now ours. The word that meant you will sign because you are old and tired and alone, and what else are you going to do? Lorraine smiled back. It was a mirror of Vanessa's smile, teeth no eyes. Yes, Lorraine said. It certainly will. That night, after the house went dark and Derek's snoring rumbled through the vents like a distant engine, Lorraine opened the flip phone one more time. A text from Edouard. Confirmed for 6 p.m. Wednesday. Bringing Margot. She handles property litigation. I'll have everything. Are you ready? Lorraine typed her reply with steady thumbs, 1 letter at a time. The way a woman types when she has all the time in the world and knows exactly what she's going to say. I've been ready for 6 years. She closed the phone, slid it back into the Bible case, and lay down on the thin mattress. She could feel the metal frame beneath her. The frame she had mentioned once and never again. The frame that was supposed to remind her of her place. She closed her eyes. She slept better than she had in months. Wednesday was coming. And with it, everything Vanessa and Derek believed about the woman in the back room was about to become the most expensive mistake of their lives. Wednesday arrived the way reckoning always does, dressed as an ordinary day. The sun came up over Metairie the same way it had for every one of the 22,000 mornings Lorraine Delacroix had lived in this house. The same light through the same kitchen window. The same hum of the same fluorescent bulb. The same creak of the third step on the staircase when Derek came down at 7:15, still half asleep, reaching for the coffee pot the way a man reaches for something he has never once had to make for himself. Lorraine was already dressed. Not in the housecoat. Not in the pale blue robe with the fraying collar. She was wearing a pressed navy blouse she had kept in the back of her closet for 6 years. The blouse she used to wear to meetings at the flower shop. The one with the small pearl buttons that Clyde always said made her look like she was about to acquire a company. She had paired it with dark slacks and the one piece of jewelry she had not packed away. A thin gold bracelet Clyde had given her on their 30th anniversary, engraved on the inside with 2 words she had never shown anyone. Still choosing. He had meant it as a love note, that after 30 years, he was still choosing her, every morning, every argument, every quiet Sunday. But Lorraine had carried those words differently since his death. They had become her compass. A reminder that choosing was not something that happened once. It was something you did every day, in every silence, in every moment you let pass without speaking. For 6 years she had chosen to wait. Today she was choosing something else. "Morning, Mama." Derek poured his coffee without looking at her. "You look nice." "Thank you, baby." "Special occasion?" Lorraine took a sip from her mug, the chipped world's best grandma mug, because today of all days, she wanted to hold it one last time as the woman they thought she was. "I just felt like dressing up," she said. He nodded, already scrolling his phone. He did not notice the blouse. He did not notice the bracelet. He did not notice that his mother's spine was straighter than it had been in years, or that her eyes held the particular clarity of someone who has made a decision they will not reverse. He noticed none of it. And that, Lorraine thought, was exactly the problem. By 2 o'clock, Vanessa was in full production mode. She had come home from her morning errands with a folder of her own, a newer, sleeker version of the manila one from Sunday, this one in a leather portfolio embossed with the initials of Derek's financial advisor, Marcus Webb. She set it on the dining room table with the ceremony of someone laying a cornerstone. "I called Marcus," Vanessa announced, adjusting the portfolio's angle for the 3rd time. "He confirmed that the notary can be here by 4:30. She'll bring her seal, we'll get the signatures witnessed, and then we can all breathe. We can all breathe." As if the only thing preventing oxygen from entering the house was Lorraine's unsigned name on a piece of paper. "That sounds fine," Lorraine said from the kitchen doorway. Vanessa looked up. For the first time she seemed to register the blouse, the bracelet, the posture. A tiny crease appeared between her eyebrows, the kind of crease that forms when something in the environment has shifted and the brain hasn't yet identified what. "You look put together today, Mom." "I wanted to be presentable," Lorraine said. "For the signing." The crease smoothed. Vanessa's smile returned. "That's so sweet. You know, I think this is really going to give you peace of mind. Knowing Derek can handle things if anything ever comes up. And Marcus said we can add a healthcare directive at the same time, so everything's bundled. One stop, all done." A healthcare directive. Lorraine let that one settle. A healthcare directive would give Derek, which meant Vanessa, the authority to make medical decisions on her behalf, to decide where she lived, to decide what care she received, to decide, if it ever came to it, whether she stayed in her own home or was moved to a facility where someone else would choose her meals, her schedule, her level of freedom. Bundled. Like a cable package. Like a convenience. Like a woman's autonomy was a line item that could be folded into the same transaction as a property transfer and filed before dinner. "That's very thorough," Lorraine said. "Marcus is the best," Vanessa agreed. She checked her watch. "I'm going to pick up the kids from school. Derek's leaving work early. We should all be back by 4. The notary's coming at 4:30. Is there anything you need before then?" Lorraine shook her head. "I'll be here." Vanessa grabbed her keys, her bag, and the particular energy of a woman who believes she is 2 hours away from getting exactly what she wants. She paused at the front door. "Oh, and Mom? I really appreciate you being open to this. I know it's a lot to process, but it's the right thing. For everyone." "I know what the right thing is, Vanessa," Lorraine said quietly. The front door closed. The car started. The gravel crunched. The magnolia tree swallowed the sound. And then Lorraine was alone in her house for the last time as the woman they had invented. She moved quickly now. Not frantically. Lorraine had never been frantic in her life, but with the deliberate efficiency of a woman who had rehearsed this afternoon in her mind for months. She went to the sun porch. She opened the Bible case. She removed the flip phone and placed it on the kitchen counter beside her mug. She opened the folder Vanessa had given her on Sunday, the power of attorney, and set it on the dining table, directly beside the new leather portfolio. Then she did something she had not done in 6 years. She walked to the front closet, the one Vanessa had claimed for coats and Derek's golf bags, and reached behind the winter jackets to the back wall, where a small cardboard box sat on the top shelf covered in dust. Inside the box was a single framed photograph. Lorraine and Clyde, standing in front of this house on the day they bought it. 1987. He was wearing work boots and a grin. She was holding the keys in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers she'd arranged herself in the other. Behind them, the brick ranch gleamed in the Louisiana sun, the sold sign still staked in the lawn. Lorraine carried the photograph to the dining table and placed it between the two folders. She sat down. She folded her hands. And she waited. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Margaret Reed. The best ones are still coming. And the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. At 4:07 p.m. the front door opened. Derek came in first, loosening his tie, followed by Jalen, who disappeared upstairs with his backpack without a word, and Amara, who ran to the kitchen for a juice box. "Hey Mama," Derek said. "You been sitting here all afternoon?" "I've been thinking," Lorraine said. He didn't ask what about. He never did. Vanessa came in last, carrying a reusable grocery bag in one hand and her phone in the other. She was mid-text, to Marcus probably or the notary, and didn't look up until she was halfway to the dining room. She stopped. She saw the table. She saw the two folders. She saw the photograph. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the framed picture. "The day we bought this house," Lorraine said. "I thought it was appropriate." Vanessa's smile flickered, the hesitation of someone who has walked into a room arranged differently than she left it, and cannot yet determine whether the change is harmless or significant. "That's sweet, Mom. Very sentimental." She set down the grocery bag and checked her phone again. "Linda, that's the notary. She'll be here in about 20 minutes. I told Marcus he could join by phone if he wanted to walk you through anything." "That won't be necessary," Lorraine said. "I've read the documents." "Oh good." Relief washed across Vanessa's face like sunlight after a cloud. "Then this should be quick." "Yes," Lorraine said. "It should." Derek sat down across from her, the particular seated posture of a man who has been placed in a chair by his wife and told to be present. He glanced at the photograph, then at his mother, then at the folders. "You okay with all this, Mama?" "I'm more okay than I've been in years, baby." He smiled, a real smile, the kind she used to see when he was young, before Vanessa had taught him that warmth was a weakness and strategy was a virtue. The smile broke her heart a little. Not because it was false, but because it was genuine, and because the boy who was smiling at her had no idea what was about to happen in the house he thought was his. The doorbell rang at 4:22. Vanessa straightened her blouse. That must be Linda. She moved toward the door with the quick, controlled steps of a woman about to close a deal. She opened it. It was not Linda. Standing on the porch was a man, tall, silver-haired, dark-skinned, wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that looked like it had been tailored in a different century. He carried a leather briefcase the color of aged bourbon, and beside him stood a woman in her late 30s, sharp-featured, in a fitted black blazer with a gold pin on the lapel that Vanessa didn't recognize but that anyone in the Louisiana legal community would have identified immediately, the emblem of the New Orleans Bar Association. "Good afternoon," the man said. His voice was deep, unhurried, accented with the particular melody of old-line Creole New Orleans, the accent of shotgun houses and second-line parades and legal arguments delivered in courtrooms where the ceiling fans moved slower than the verdicts. "My name is Edouard Thibodeau. I'm here to see Lorraine." Vanessa blinked. "I'm sorry, are you a friend of hers?" "I'm her attorney." The word landed in the foyer like a dropped chandelier. Vanessa's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Behind her, Derek stood up from his chair. "Attorney," he said. Edouard stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, not out of rudeness, but with the particular authority of a man who understood that the woman who owned the house had already invited him. The younger woman, Margot, followed, her eyes moving across the room the way a surveyor's eyes move across a property line, measuring everything, missing nothing. "Mama," Derek said, his voice rising slightly. "What is this?" Lorraine stood from the dining table. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She walked to the foyer with the same steady, measured gait she had used every morning on her levee walk. The walk Vanessa had never joined. The walk Derek had never asked about. The walk that had kept her body strong and her mind clear while they told the world she was fragile. "Edouard," she said, and something in her voice, something that had been locked away, something that Vanessa and Derek had never heard because they had never listened carefully enough, surfaced. Authority. The quiet, unshakable authority of a woman who had spent 6 years in a room too small for her, watching people too small for their ambitions try to take what they hadn't earned. "Lorraine." Edouard took both her hands. He held them the way a man holds something precious, not delicately but firmly, with the grip of someone who has been protecting this woman's interests for 3 decades, and who understood that today was the day the protection became visible. "Please," Lorraine said, gesturing toward the dining table. "Sit down." Edouard and Margot took their seats. Margot opened her own briefcase, slim, black, efficient, and began removing documents with the practiced speed of someone who had done this before and understood the choreography. Derek stood by the table, frozen between sitting and standing, his face cycling through confusion, concern, and the first faint tremor of something he couldn't yet name. Vanessa was still at the front door. She had not moved. Her hand was still on the doorknob, as if she might close it and pretend the last 60 seconds hadn't happened. "Vanessa," Lorraine said. Her voice was warm. That was the part that would stay with Vanessa longest, the warmth. Because it was not the warmth of surrender. It was the warmth of someone who is about to show you something terrible, and wants you to understand that it brings her no joy. "Please come sit down. You're going to want to be seated for this." Vanessa released the doorknob. She walked to the table. She sat. The 5 of them were arranged now, Lorraine at the head, the position she had not occupied in 6 years, Edouard and Margot to her right, Derek and Vanessa to her left. Between them, the 2 folders and the photograph. The fluorescent light buzzed. "I don't understand what's happening," Derek said. "I know you don't," Lorraine replied. "And I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry that in 44 years, you never asked enough questions to know the answer before today." Derek looked at Edouard. "Who are you?" "I told you, son. I'm your mother's attorney. I've represented the Delacroix family since 1994. Your father retained me to manage the family trust, the property portfolio, and the estate plan. I continued that relationship with your mother after Clyde's passing." "Family trust." Derek repeated the words as if they were in a language he didn't speak. "Property portfolio?" Vanessa's voice was higher now. Thinner. The voice of someone who has just heard a word that doesn't fit the story she has been telling herself. Margot slid the first document across the table. It was a single page. A summary sheet, printed on Thibodeau and Associates letterhead, listing the assets of the Delacroix Legacy Trust. Derek picked it up. He read it. He read it again. Lorraine watched his face. She watched the way his eyes moved from the top of the page to the bottom, then back to the top, then to the bottom again, as if the numbers might change if he looked at them in a different order. She watched the blood leave his cheeks. She watched his lips part without sound. She watched him become, in the space of 30 seconds, a man who understood that everything he believed about his mother was wrong. Derek's hands began to shake. Not dramatically. Not the shaking of a man in crisis, but the fine involuntary tremor of someone whose understanding of the world is being reorganized while he watches. "This says..." He trailed off. He looked at Edouard, then at Margot, then back at the page, as if one of them might tell him he was reading it wrong. "Read it out loud, baby," Lorraine said. Not unkindly. The way she used to ask him to read his report cards aloud at the kitchen table, with patience, and with the understanding that what he was about to say would change the conversation. "This says the trust holds 11 residential properties. Monthly rental income of $31,400. Total portfolio value." He stopped. He looked up at his mother. $4.7 million. The number hung in the air above the dining table like smoke from a candle. Vanessa snatched the paper from his hand. She read it the way a person reads a parking ticket. Fast, furious, searching for the error that will make it go away. "This can't be right," she said. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone confronting not a fact but an insult, as though the numbers were a personal offense against everything she had believed about the woman in the sun porch. "It's right," Edouard said. He did not elaborate. He did not defend. He simply stated it the way a man states the time of day, without argument, without the need for agreement. "Clyde was a pipe fitter," Vanessa said, as if his job title were a rebuttal. Clyde was a pipe fitter who spent 30 years buying properties, fixing them with his own hands, and renting them to families who needed homes. He did this with Lorraine, who managed the bookkeeping and the tenants while running her own business on Magazine Street. The trust was established in 2002. It has been professionally managed since your father-in-law's death. Derek had not spoken. He was still holding the edge of the table, staring at the empty space where the summary sheet had been before Vanessa took it. His mind was doing what minds do when they encounter information that contradicts everything, replaying, rewinding, seeing every moment of the last 6 years through a lens he hadn't known existed. The mornings Lorraine walked the levee alone. The evenings she sat in the sun porch reading. The Sundays she excused herself to go to CVS. The times she had said nothing when Vanessa rearranged the furniture. Nothing when she was seated at the breakfast bar on Thanksgiving. Nothing when her grandchild's family tree had no branch for her. He had mistaken that silence for acceptance, for resignation, for the quiet fading of a woman who had no other options. He understood now, sitting at this table under this buzzing fluorescent light, in a house he had never owned, that his mother's silence had been something else entirely. It had been a choice, a test, and he had failed it. Vanessa looked at Lorraine. For the first time in 6 years, the performing smile was gone. In its place was something raw, not remorse, not yet. Calculation. The rapid, desperate calculation of a woman who is realizing that the chessboard she has been playing on is not the chessboard she thought it was, and that the piece she dismissed as a pawn is, in fact, the queen. "You knew about this?" Vanessa whispered. "This whole time. I've known about it since the day Clyde and I signed the trust documents," Lorraine said. 23 years. "And you never said anything? You never asked." The silence that followed was not the polite silence of a dinner table. It was the silence of a courtroom after a verdict, heavy, final, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to swallow. Margot slid the second document across the table. This one was thicker, a certified copy of a property deed, filed with the Jefferson Parish Clerk of Court, bearing 2 names, Clyde Joseph Delacroix and Lorraine Marie Delacroix. Right of survivorship. Sole ownership transferred to Lorraine upon Clyde's death. The property address. This house. This kitchen. This table. This room where Vanessa had rearranged the furniture and changed the locks and replaced the wedding china with desert sage stoneware, and given Lorraine the sun porch because it was the smallest room with the thinnest mattress. "This is the deed to the house you're sitting in," Lorraine said. Her voice did not waver. "It has been in my name, solely in my name, since Clyde passed. It was never transferred to Derek. It was never shared. It was never put in anyone else's name. This is my house." Derek looked at the deed. He looked at the photograph, 1987, the sold sign, the sunflowers, and something in his expression collapsed. Not loudly. The way a levee collapses. Slowly at first and then all at once. "Mama," he said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," Lorraine said. "Because you never looked." Vanessa's hands were flat on the table, pressing down, as if the surface might tilt and slide everything into the floor. Her eyes were moving between the trust summary, the deed, Edouard, Margot, and Lorraine, searching for the angle, the weakness, the opening she could exploit to regain the position she had held 5 minutes ago. "This doesn't change the power of attorney," Vanessa said. Her voice was controlled again, the control of someone who has been cornered and is choosing precision over panic. "The POA is about future planning. It's about Derek's ability to step in if something happens to you. It's not about the house." Margot spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, precise, and carried the particular weight of someone who had spent the last 48 hours reviewing every page of the document Vanessa had placed in front of a 72-year-old woman and told her not to read. Actually, Margot said. It is. She opened the power of attorney to page 5, the real property clause, and turned it so Vanessa could see. This clause grants the agent Derek full authority to sell, lease, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of any real property owned by or title to the principal. The principal is Lorraine. The real property title to Lorraine includes this house, which is worth, based on current Jefferson Parish assessments, approximately $410,000. She paused. Let that number sit. It also includes, through the trust, 11 additional properties with a combined assessed value of $3.2 million. The POA as drafted does not distinguish between personally held property and trust-held property. It uses the phrase owned by or titled to, which, depending on interpretation, could extend the agent's authority into the trust's assets, particularly if the principal is later deemed incapacitated. Which brings us, Edouard said, leaning forward, to the healthcare directive your wife mentioned bundling into today's signing, a directive that would give Derek, and by extension you, Mrs. Delacroix, the authority to make decisions about Lorraine's medical care, including decisions about her mental competency, including decisions about where she lives. The silence now was different. It was the silence of exposure, the moment when every casual comment, every gentle suggestion, every whispered aside about Mama being forgetful in twilight years and managing her care reassembled itself into a pattern that could no longer be mistaken for coincidence. Vanessa's face had gone white. Not the white of fear. The white of a woman whose reflection has just appeared in a mirror she did not know was there. I wasn't trying to, she began. Yes, you were, Lorraine said. 3 words. Quiet. Absolute. The quietest devastation the room had ever held. Lorraine reached across the table and picked up the power of attorney. She held it in both hands, the document that was supposed to be her surrender, the paper that Vanessa had called boilerplate and filler and just a safety net, and she looked at it one last time. Then she tore it in half. The sound was small, the crisp, clean rip of heavy paper, but in the silence of that dining room it sounded like something much larger breaking. A narrative. A lie. A 6-year performance that had just lost its stage. Lorraine placed the 2 halves on the table, one on each side of the photograph. Here is what is going to happen, she said. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Amara's tablet, which had been playing faintly from the kitchen, seemed to go quiet. Edouard is going to file a formal notification with the Jefferson Parish Clerk of Court, confirming my sole ownership of this property and placing a legal hold that prevents any transfer, lien or encumbrance without my written, witnessed and notarized consent. Consent that must be verified by my attorney, not by anyone in this room. She looked at Derek. That includes you, baby. He nodded. His eyes were wet. Margot is going to file a protective order against any future attempts to obtain power of attorney, healthcare directives, or guardianship petitions on my behalf without judicial review and independent legal counsel appointed by the court, not by Marcus Webb, not by anyone Vanessa has met at a networking brunch. She looked at Vanessa. That includes you. Vanessa's mouth was a thin line. Her hands were still flat on the table. She did not argue. Not because she agreed, but because for the first time in 6 years she was sitting across from a woman who held every card, every deed, every dollar, and who had just made it clear that the game was over. And one more thing, Lorraine said. She reached beneath the table, into the Bible case she had brought with her, the one with the zippered pocket and the laminated prayer card of St. Therese, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the table. It was a notice, typed, dated, signed by Edouard Thibodeau as legal counsel. It read, Notice to vacate 90 days. The owner of the property located at address, Lorraine Marie Delacroix, hereby provides notice to all current occupants that the premises must be vacated within 90 days of the date of this notice. This action is taken at the sole discretion of the property owner, and does not constitute an eviction proceeding at this time. Derek stared at the paper. Mama, you're asking us to leave? Lorraine looked at him. At the boy who had thrown a baseball indoors and left a dent in the living room wall. At the man who had kissed her forehead every evening without warmth. At the son who had sat in a chair while his wife dismantled his mother's dignity one careful sentence at a time. I'm not asking, baby, she said. I'm telling. The way I should have told you the first time Vanessa moved my china to the top shelf. The way I should have told you the first time she introduced me as someone who stays. The way I should have told you when Amara drew a family tree, and I wasn't on it. Her voice did not break. Her hands did not tremble. The woman in the back room, the woman in the housecoat, the woman with the chipped mug and the thin mattress and the single window facing the neighbor's fence, was gone. In her place sat Lorraine Marie Delacroix, owner of 11 properties, beneficiary of a $4.7 million trust, sole title holder of the house she was now, quietly and completely reclaiming. Edouard placed his hand over Lorraine's. Not to steady her, she was steady. To honor her. Because he had watched this woman choose silence for 6 years, and he understood, better than anyone else in that room, what the silence had cost and what the speaking had required. 90 days, Lorraine repeated. That's more than I was given when you moved me into a room smaller than the one you gave the dog. They didn't have a dog. That was the point. Vanessa pushed back from the table. The chair legs scraped against the tile Lorraine had chosen in 2001, the tile Vanessa had complained about wanting to replace every year since she'd moved in. You can't do this, Vanessa said. But her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of authority. It was the voice of someone who has just realized that authority is not something you claim. It is something you hold. And she had never held it. Not in this house. Not once. I can, Lorraine said simply. And I am. Derek put his head in his hands. The sound he made was not quite crying. It was the low, involuntary exhale of a man whose foundation has just been pulled out from beneath him, the sound of understanding arriving too late and landing too hard. All those years, he said, his voice muffled by his palms. You could have said something. You could have told us. Yes, Lorraine agreed. I could have. But I wanted to see what you would do when you thought I had nothing. I wanted to know if you would still be kind when there was nothing to gain from it. She paused. Let the words arrive where they needed to. And now I know. From the kitchen, the faint sound of Amara's tablet drifted in. A cartoon character saying something cheerful and oblivious. The sound of a child who did not yet understand what was happening in the next room. The sound of innocence that Lorraine was determined to protect, even as she dismantled the structure that had tried to consume her. Because this was never about revenge. Lorraine Delacroix had not spent 6 years in the sun porch plotting destruction. She had spent 6 years hoping, genuinely deeply hoping that her son would wake up. That he would look at her one morning and see not a burden to be managed, not a name on a deed to be transferred, but the woman who had raised him, who had worked 2 decades arranging other people's joy while building her own family's future with hands that never stopped moving. She had hoped, and the hope had cost her. But the cost of hope is not the same as the cost of surrender, and Lorraine had never, not once in 72 years, surrendered. Edouard began collecting the documents. Margot made a note on her legal pad. The meeting, such as it was, had ended. Not with shouting. Not with theatrics. With paper. With facts. With the quiet, immovable weight of truth laid on a table in a house that everyone in the room now understood belonged to one person only. We'll file everything tomorrow morning, Edouard said, rising from his chair. He buttoned his jacket with the deliberate care of a man who treats every gesture as if it matters. Because to Edouard Thibodeau it did. Lorraine, is there anything else you need tonight? Lorraine looked around the dining room, at the walls she had painted, the floors she had mopped, the table she had served 1,000 meals on to people who had stopped saying thank you so long ago that the absence had become its own kind of silence. No, she said. I have everything I need. Edouard nodded. He placed his hand on her shoulder, briefly, firmly, the way Clyde used to, and walked to the door. Margot followed. At the threshold, Edouard turned back. He looked at Derek. Your mother, he said, is the finest person I have ever represented. Your father knew that. I hope in time you will remember that you once knew it too. The door closed behind them. The fluorescent light buzzed. And in the dining room of the house she had owned for 38 years, Lorraine Marie Delacroix sat alone with her son and his wife, the torn halves of a power of attorney, and a 90-day notice that was, in truth, the most generous thing she had ever given them. The first night after the reveal, Lorraine did not sleep in the sun porch. She stood in the hallway at 11 o'clock, the house dark around her, and looked at the 2 doors. On the left, the sun porch, The narrow wood-paneled room with the thin mattress and the single window facing the neighbor's fence. The room where she had folded herself away for 6 years like a letter no one intended to read. On the right, the master bedroom, the room she and Clyde had shared for 30 years, the room with the bay window that caught the morning light, the room Vanessa and Derek had claimed on the second day they moved in without asking, without discussion, without the particular pause that a decent person would have taken before sleeping in a bed that still smelled like someone else's marriage. Lorraine turned right. She opened the door. The room had been redecorated, Vanessa's doing of course. Gone was the quilt Lorraine's mother had sewn. Gone was the mahogany nightstand Clyde had built from scrap wood salvaged from a renovation on Domain Street. In their place were things that looked expensive and meant nothing. A upholstered headboard in a color called greige, matching nightstands from a catalog, and linen curtains that pooled on the floor in a way that was meant to look effortless but required dry cleaning. Lorraine did not sleep in the bed. She sat in the armchair by the bay window, a chair Vanessa had kept because it was too heavy to move, and she looked out at the street where Clyde had taught Derek to ride a bicycle, where she had stood on the porch and watched her husband plant the rose bushes that still bloomed every April despite no one tending them except her. She sat there until the sky turned the color of a bruised peach, and then she stood, went to the kitchen and made her coffee. Real coffee. Dark roast. Community brand. The mug that said World's Best Grandma. She opened the window above the sink, the window that Vanessa had kept closed because she said the street noise bothered her, and let the morning air come in. It smelled the way Metairie mornings have always smelled, of cut grass, distant jasmine, and the faint mineral tang of the levee. It smelled like the mornings she remembered from before, from the years when this kitchen was hers, when Clyde would stand at this counter scrambling eggs while she arranged the day's first flowers at the table, when the house was full of their life and no one else's claims. She stood at that window for a long time, letting the air touch her face, letting the silence be hers rather than something imposed. When Derek came down at 7:15, he found his mother sitting at the head of the dining table, in the chair that had been Clyde's, in the spot no one had sat since 1987. He stopped in the doorway. "Mama." "Good morning, baby," she said. "There's coffee." He did not sit. He stood there for a long time, looking at her the way a man looks at a building he has walked past 1,000 times and is seeing for the first time as architecture. "Where did you sleep?" he asked. "In my room," she said. He understood. He did not argue. He poured his coffee and left for work without another word. Vanessa did not come downstairs until she heard his car leave the driveway. When she appeared, she was wearing sunglasses indoors, the kind of gesture that announces itself as armor, and she moved through the kitchen without speaking, without making eye contact, without the practiced warmth that had been her primary tool for 6 years. She poured juice. She gathered her bag. She paused at the door. "I'll have our things out of the bedroom by tonight," she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of performance, the voice of someone who has been outplayed and knows it. "Thank you," Lorraine said. The door closed. And that was the beginning. The 90 days unfolded the way seasons change. Not all at once, but in accumulation so gradual that you don't realize the landscape has transformed until you look up one morning and everything is different. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. Not because of conflict, there was almost none. That was the part no one warns you about. Betrayal doesn't always end in screaming. Sometimes it ends in the particular silence of people who live in the same house and no longer pretend to be a family. Derek came and went. He was quieter now. Not the comfortable quiet of a man who doesn't notice things, but the raw, ashamed quiet of a man who has finally noticed everything and doesn't know what to say about any of it. He stopped calling her mama with the automatic, unthinking cadence he'd used before. Now when he said it, there was weight behind it. Hesitation. The awareness that the word meant something he had not honored. Vanessa retreated into logistics. She was, Lorraine had to admit, efficient in departure the way she had been efficient in occupation, organized, systematic, unsentimental. She called realtors. She toured apartments. She found a 3-bedroom rental in Kenner, 14 minutes away, and negotiated the lease with the same sharp competence she had once used to negotiate Lorraine out of her own dining table. She did not apologize. Lorraine did not expect her to. Apology requires the ability to see yourself clearly, and Vanessa had spent too many years constructing a version of herself that could not survive that kind of scrutiny. To apologize would be to admit not just that she had done something wrong, but that the person she had done it to was worth more than she had allowed. And that admission, the admission of Lorraine's worth, was the one thing Vanessa could not bring herself to make, because it would mean acknowledging that every dinner eaten at the breakfast bar, every family tree without a branch, every introduced visit to a school teacher with the words managing her care had been not a kindness but a cruelty. And Vanessa needed to believe she was kind. That belief was the last wall she had left. So she packed. And she did not say sorry. And Lorraine let her go without asking for it, because some debts are not paid in words. They are paid in absence. In the space that opens when the person who took too much finally takes themselves away. Even during the packing, Vanessa could not resist the small performances. She wrapped items in tissue paper with theatrical care, sighing loudly enough to be heard from the next room. She left the room she vacated spotless, not out of consideration, but out of the need to demonstrate that she was leaving things better than she found them, a final revision of the narrative that positioned her as the caretaker, the improver, the woman who had done the difficult work of managing a household that included an aging mother-in-law. One afternoon, Lorraine found a stack of brochures in the recycling bin. The same senior living pamphlets Vanessa had accumulated over the years, the glossy ones with the smiling gray-haired couples walking through manicured gardens. There were 11 of them. Lorraine counted. 11 brochures for 11 facilities, each one a version of the future Vanessa had been quietly building for the woman who owned the house she was now leaving. Lorraine placed them on the kitchen counter. She did not throw them away. She wanted to remember. Not out of bitterness, she had no room for bitterness. It takes up space that could be used for living, but out of clarity. She wanted to remember what silence costs when you give it to people who mistake it for consent. The neighborhood noticed the changes, the way neighborhoods always do. Not through announcements but through the subtle shifts in routine that mark the difference between a house in transition and a house at peace. Mrs. Tran next door brought over a pot of pho the week after the moving truck came, and sat at Lorraine's kitchen table for an hour without asking a single question about what had happened. She simply said, "Your house feels lighter." And Lorraine had nodded and said, "It is." The women at St. Catherine's prayer group, women Lorraine had known for decades, women who had watched from a polite distance as Vanessa introduced Lorraine at every church function as someone being managed, began calling again. One by one, as if a signal had been given that it was safe to approach. They brought food. They brought company. They brought the particular warmth of women who had seen what was happening and had been waiting, with the patience that church women cultivate like a spiritual discipline, for Lorraine to come back to herself. "We knew," said Mabel Fontenot, who had sat 3 pews behind Lorraine at Mass every Sunday for 20 years. "We knew something wasn't right. But you never asked for help, and we didn't want to overstep." "I wasn't ready," Lorraine said. "And now I'm here." That was enough. For women like Mabel, who understood that presence is its own form of power, it was everything. But the children were the part that cracked Lorraine open. Jalen at 12 understood more than he showed. He had been watching, the way children watch, absorbing the tension, the silences, the shifting geography of power inside a house that had rearranged itself around him. He didn't ask questions directly. He asked them sideways the way 12-year-olds do, through behavior rather than words. The week after the reveal, he started coming down to the kitchen in the mornings before school. Not for breakfast, Vanessa had always handled that, portioning out organic yogurt and sliced fruit with the precision of a cafeteria, but to sit. Just to sit at the table with Lorraine while she drank her coffee. He didn't say much. He would eat a piece of toast and look at his phone, and Lorraine would look out the window, and they would share the particular companionship of 2 people who don't need to fill silence with noise. One morning, a Thursday 3 weeks in, he set his phone down and looked at her. "Gigi." "Yes, baby. Is this your house?" "It is." He nodded, processing. "So when Dad and Mom, when they were saying they were taking care of you, they were living in your house the whole time?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's messed up." Lorraine almost laughed. The directness of 12, the beautiful undecorated honesty of a child who has not yet learned to coat the truth in euphemism. "Yes, baby," she said. "It is." "Are you mad at Dad?" She considered this. She considered it the way she considered everything, slowly, fully, with the patience of a woman who had spent 7 decades learning that the first answer is rarely the true one. "I'm hurt," she said. "Hurt and mad aren't the same thing. Mad goes away. Hurt has to heal." He nodded again. Then he picked up his phone, stood and paused at the door. "I'm glad it's your house, Gigi," he said. "You're the only one who ever made it feel like one." He left for school. Lorraine sat at the table for a long time after that, holding her coffee mug with both hands, and let the tears come, not many, not loudly, but enough to mark the moment as the one that mattered most. Not the reveal. Not the torn document. Not the notice. This. A 12-year-old boy standing in a doorway, telling his grandmother that she was the one who made the walls mean something. That was the moment Lorraine knew she had done the right thing. Not because of the money. Not because of the deed. Because of the boy who saw her. The boy who had always seen her, even when the people who were supposed to be looking had turned away. Amara was harder. At 8, she did not understand the architecture of what had happened. The legal structures, the financial revelations, the adult betrayals that had reshaped her world. She understood only the surface. That they were moving, that Gigi was staying, that something had broken and no one was explaining what. She cried the first night they told her. Vanessa handled the conversation, of course she did. Framing the move as an adventure, a fresh start, a chance to have her own room with a balcony. Amara was not fooled. Children are never fooled by adults who decorate bad news. They feel the weight of it the way animals feel earthquakes before the ground moves, while the adults are still insisting everything is fine. "But why can't Gigi come?" Amara had asked. "Gigi has her own house, sweetie," Vanessa had said. "This is her house," Amara had replied. Vanessa had not answered. The weekend before the move, Lorraine asked Derek if Amara could spend Saturday with her. He agreed, quickly, almost desperately, with the eagerness of a man who is looking for any way to prove he is not the person his actions have made him appear to be. Amara arrived with a backpack full of markers and a stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. She walked through the front door, looked around the living room and said, "It looks different." "I moved some things," Lorraine said. She had. In the weeks since the reveal, she had begun the slow, deliberate process of restoring the house to itself. The wedding china was back on the accessible shelf. Clyde's photograph hung in the hallway again. The mahogany nightstand, retrieved from the garage where Vanessa had stored it, was back in the bedroom. The sun porch was no longer a bedroom. It was a sun porch again, filled with light, and the 2 rocking chairs Lorraine had pulled from the attic, the ones she and Clyde had bought at a flea market in Bro Bridge the year they got married. Amara spent the morning drawing at the kitchen table. Lorraine baked a sweet potato pie from scratch, the recipe her mother had taught her and she had taught no one because no one had asked to learn. At noon, Amara looked up from her drawing. "Gigi." "Yes, baby. Why did Mommy say you were visiting?" "You were here first." Lorraine set down her rolling pin. She came around the counter and sat in the chair beside her granddaughter. She looked at the drawing, a house like the one Sophie had drawn in the other story, with a tree and 3 figures, Gigi, Amara, and Jalen. No Vanessa. No Derek. Just the 3 of them in a house with a sun above it. "Sometimes," Lorraine said carefully, "people say things that aren't true because it makes their own story easier to tell. Your mama said I was visiting because if she said I lived here, really lived here, she would have had to treat me differently." "Like how?" "Like someone who mattered." Amara looked at her drawing. Then she picked up a marker, the gold one, the one she saved for important details, and wrote 3 letters above the door of the house. "Figi." "There," she said, satisfied. "Now everyone knows." Derek and Vanessa moved out on a Saturday in late October, 67 days after the notice, 3 weeks early. The moving truck arrived at 8 in the morning, and by noon, the house was emptied of everything that had never belonged there. Vanessa directed the movers the way she directed everything, with precision, speed, and the absolute refusal to make eye contact with Lorraine, who stood on the porch drinking coffee and watching the dismantling of a life that had been built on her foundation without her permission. When the last box was loaded, Vanessa walked to the moving truck without pausing. She did not say goodbye. She did not look back. She climbed into the passenger seat, closed the door, and the truck pulled away, taking with it the desert sage stoneware, the greige headboard, and the particular atmosphere of a woman who had spent 6 years treating someone else's home as her own staging ground. Derek lingered. He stood on the lawn his father had mowed every Saturday, the lawn Lorraine had edged by hand because no one else ever thought to, and he looked at the house. "Mama," he said, "I'm here. I don't know how to fix this." "You don't fix it, baby. You start over." Starting over is different from fixing. Fixing means you go back. Starting over means you go forward and you choose better. He nodded. His jaw worked. He was fighting something. The particular war that happens inside a man who has spent his adult life following the wrong voice and is now standing in the silence that follows its departure. "Can I come see you?" he asked. Not to ask for anything. Just to come. "You can come on Sundays," Lorraine said. "Bring the children. Don't bring excuses." He almost smiled. It was the shadow of one. The ghost of the boy who used to run through the sprinklers on this same lawn while Clyde grilled chicken and Lorraine arranged flowers on the porch table. "Yes, ma'am." He got in his car. He drove away. And Lorraine stood on the porch of her house, the house she and Clyde had bought in 1987, the house she had maintained for 38 years, the house she had nearly lost not to a bank or a disaster but to the quiet, incremental cruelty of being underestimated by the people she loved, and she breathed. The air tasted different. Not because the air had changed but because for the first time in 6 years she was breathing in her own space on her own terms, without the weight of performing smallness for people who needed her to be less so they could feel like more. 6 months later, the house on the quiet street in Metairie had become something new. Not renovated. Lorraine had no interest in renovation for its own sake, no desire to erase the history of the walls in favor of something modern and unfamiliar. She had simply restored. The way a museum restores a painting. Not changing it, but removing the layers of varnish and grime that had accumulated over years of being in the wrong hands, until the original colors came through again. She had the roof repaired. The one that hadn't leaked yet but would have, the kind of prevention Clyde would have approved of. She had the kitchen repainted in a warm cream that made the morning light glow like honey. She had the fluorescent bulb replaced, finally after years of that terrible buzz, with a fixture she chose herself. A simple pendant light with a warm amber tone that made the kitchen feel like the kitchen she remembered from before anyone had tried to take it from her. She had the sun porch restored to its original purpose, lined with the rocking chairs from the attic and a small bookshelf she filled with the novels she hadn't had time to read when she was too busy being invisible. She put new sheets on the master bedroom bed. Her bed now, truly hers, and she slept 8 hours every night with the window cracked and the jasmine coming in off the breeze. She called Edouard one morning in February, not for business but to say thank you. He listened the way he always did, with the serious formal attention of a man who believed that gratitude was as worthy of careful reception as a legal brief, and then he said, "Lorraine, you never needed saving. You needed an audience. I was simply honored to hold the seat." She rejoined her garden club. She started volunteering at the food bank at St. Catherine's on Thursday mornings, working beside women her own age who spoke to her as an equal, not as a project. She had dinner every other Wednesday with Edouard and his wife, Colette, at a restaurant in the French Quarter where the maitre d' knew Lorraine by name because she and Clyde had been coming there since 1996. She ordered the redfish every time. Clyde's order. Some traditions are not about the past. They are about carrying the people you love into the present by remembering what they chose. She was not lonely. That was the thing people assumed, that a 72-year-old woman living alone in a 3-bedroom house must be lonely, must be rattling around in the silence, must need someone to fill the rooms. But Lorraine had learned something that loneliness cannot teach. The difference between being alone and being emptied. She had been emptied for 6 years, emptied of her authority, her dignity, her place at her own table. Now she was alone, and alone felt like abundance. Like air. Like the first morning after a long illness when you open the window and realize you can breathe. Derek came on Sundays. He came without Vanessa. They had separated formally by January, and the divorce was filed by March. He came with Jalen and Amara, and he sat at the kitchen table and ate whatever Lorraine cooked. And he did not ask about the trust or the properties or the money. He asked about her. How she was sleeping. Whether the garden was coming in. If she needed anything from the hardware store. Small questions. Real questions. The kind of questions he should have been asking for 6 years and was now asking with the particular sincerity of a man who understands that second chances are not guaranteed, and that the woman offering this one is doing so not because she has forgotten what happened, but because she has decided that what comes next matters more than what came before. He was different in ways that were hard to measure but impossible to miss. He arrived on time. He cleaned his plate and carried it to the sink without being asked. He sat in the living room and watched football with Jalen instead of disappearing into his phone. He asked Lorraine about the flower shop, about the years she spent building Delacroix florals, the arrangements she designed, the clients she served. Questions he had never asked in 4 decades of being her son. Questions that, each time he posed them, seemed to cost him something. The cost of realizing how much of his mother's life he had dismissed as unimportant because he had never bothered to learn that it existed. One Sunday in March, he helped her repair the garden fence. The fence Clyde had built in 1994. The fence no one had maintained since his death. They worked side by side for 2 hours without speaking much. And when they finished, Derek stood back and looked at the fence with the expression of a man who was seeing not a repaired fence but a repaired connection, small and imperfect and held together with new nails and old wood, but standing. "Dad would have done it faster," Derek said. "Your daddy would have done it while whistling," Lorraine replied. Derek almost laughed. Then he looked down at his hands, the hands that had signed nothing, taken nothing, but had also done nothing to stop what was being taken, and said, "I'm trying, Mama. I know you are, baby. That's why you're still here." It was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was a word too large for the moment. It was permission to keep trying, permission to keep showing up, permission to build something new in the space where something old had been broken. And that permission, Lorraine understood, was worth more than any apology Derek could have spoken, because it was not given once. It was given every Sunday, every visit, every meal shared at a table where the chairs were no longer assigned by anyone but her. One Sunday in April, Amara brought a framed drawing. She presented it to Lorraine with both hands, the way a child presents a treasure. It was the house again, the same house she had drawn before, with the tree and the sun, but this time it was different. There were more details. The rose bushes by the porch, the pendant light visible through the kitchen window, the rocking chairs on the sun porch. And above the door, in careful gold letters, not just "I" but a full sentence in the handwriting of an 8-year-old who had thought very hard about what she wanted to say. Gigi's house. She was here first. Lorraine held the drawing in her hands. She did not speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was steady because Lorraine Delacroix's voice was always steady, but her eyes were not. Her eyes were full, overflowing with the particular grief and joy that come from being truly seen by someone who is too young to know how rare that is. "Thank you, baby," she said. "I used the gold marker," Amara said, as if that explained everything. It did. Lorraine hung the drawing in the hallway, beside the photograph of her and Clyde on the day they bought the house. 2 images, 38 years apart, both saying the same thing. "This is mine and I am still here." Derek knocked one last time before he left that Sunday. He stood in the doorway, not inside, not claiming space, just present, and he said something he had never said in 44 years of being her son. "I see you now, Mama. I should have seen you sooner. But I see you." Lorraine looked at him, at the boy who had thrown the baseball, at the man who had looked away, at the son who was now slowly, carefully learning to look back. "Then keep looking," she said. He nodded. He stepped off the porch and then he stopped. He turned back. "Mama, the trust. The properties. All of it. I don't want any of it. I want you to know that." Lorraine looked at him. She held his gaze long enough that he would remember it. "I know you don't want it now," she said. "And that matters. But wanting nothing and earning something are different things. Edward and I have been talking about setting up education accounts for Jalen and Amara, separate from everything else. Protected. The kind of thing your father would have wanted, his grandchildren's futures built on something solid, not on someone else's sacrifice." Derek's chin trembled. "Just barely. Just enough." "You do that?" he asked. "I already have," she said. "I did it the week after you left. Because this was never about punishing you, Derek. It was about making sure the people in this family understand that love is not a transaction. That a mother's patience is not a resource to be extracted. and that the woman who built the foundation has the right to decide who gets to stand on it. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, quickly, the way men do when they don't want to be seen crying and don't yet understand that being seen is the whole point. Thank you, Mama. Don't thank me, baby. Raise those children to see people the way I needed you to see me. That's all the thanks I need. The door closed. The pendant light glowed. The house settled into its evening quiet. Not the hollow quiet of absence, but the full warm quiet of a life reclaimed. Lorraine Delacroix walked to the kitchen. She washed her mug, the chipped one, the one she kept not because she couldn't afford a new one, but because some things earn the right to stay by being there through everything. She placed it on the counter right side up, ready for tomorrow. She turned off the lights one by one, the way she did every night now, not out of habit but out of ownership. Every switch was hers. Every shadow was hers. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the refrigerator, every whisper of wind through the bay window, all hers. At the front door she paused. She ran her hand along the frame. The frame Clyde had sanded and repainted in 1993, the frame that still held the faintest groove where Jalen had scratched his initials with a house key when he was 4. She locked the door. Not out of fear. Out of certainty. Because this house, this life, this peace, this second act was hers. It had always been hers. The only thing that had changed was that now everyone knew it. And Lorraine Marie Delacroix, florist, landlord, grandmother, quiet architect of a fortune no one imagined and a dignity no one could take, planned to spend the rest of her life in exactly the space she had earned, at the head of her own table, in the center of her own story, taking up every inch of room she deserved. She had been small long enough. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.